Let's grow some plants. Okay guys, so today I thought I would put together a very basic video on propagating. So the definition of propagation is to breed or clone or duplicate a plant in some manner. So it can take many forms. You can propagate through leaf cuttings, stem cuttings. You could divide the plant and separate them into different pots and they would grow and flourish as well. There are so many different ways that you can propagate. So I wanted to talk about some of the very basic methods that you would probably use at home for your basic house plants. And we'll go through a small demonstration of propagation and have a little fun. The majority of plants, the easiest way of propagating is through cuttings. Now this doesn't apply to every plant. Some plants cannot be propagated through cuttings, but the majority of them can. You probably want to look up each individual plant to find the most successful way of propagating that species, because there's such a broad spectrum of plants and there's really no way for sure of looking and knowing, but you can always experiment and take a couple of cuttings from a plant and try propagating it different ways to see which way works best. I have 3 methods of propagation here. One would be to put your cuttings into water. Another is to use a sphagnum moss mixture and basically plant in a box. And then the other is directly put into soil. Now each one obviously has its own pros and cons. There's really not a preferred or perfect way of doing it. But again, part of the fun of propagating is just experimenting and trying. Or let's start off with water propagations. So I have a couple of plants here. I have philodendron Brazil cuttings, and then I have a snake plant cutting here as well. So once you take your cuttings from the plant, you would basically put it directly in water, and it can take an undeterminable amount of time because for each plant it varies, and even each cutting varies too. Without getting too deep and scientific, you would basically wait for roots to grow out. On the snake plant, these do grow a little slower. You'll eventually get some roots. You'll start to see new growth coming from the bottom, and then once you see that, you can put it directly into soil and let that grow. These philodendron Brazil cuttings have been in water, I would say for maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and we have significant roots coming from the bottom as well, which I'm afraid of taking them all out or I would not be able to get them all back in. Get in there. Oh no. A lot of times people prefer to water propagate because they enjoy seeing the roots grow in water. There's really no rhyme or reason, but personal preference. Some plants propagate better in water, some do not. That's why it's also very important to make sure that you research each plant. But it's attractive on its own. I've seen a lot of people propagate in water and just use this as decoration, and it's cute. Once you see significant root growth, then you would want to plant it in soil in order for more plant growth, but relatively easy. The sphagnum moss technique, typically you would use for leaf cuttings. You can use for stem cuttings as well. I prefer to use it for leaf cuttings myself, but I have the peperomia, the black pagoda, and then I have a small piece of dischidia that fell off of my plant, and I didn't want to throw it out and wanted to save it, and I actually have little roots growing from it. So the idea of the sphagnum moss mixture, I actually use dirty sphagnum. I find that pure sphagnum can be too wet. and can rot the roots or rot the leaves. So I tend to use a dirty sphagnum mixture, which is sphagnum moss mixed in with a little tiny bit of coco coir and perlite. But typically it's just sphagnum moss and perlite. And I find that to be the most successful myself. Once you have a leaf, you just kind of bury it into the sphagnum mixture. You don't want it to be too deep. Eventually, you will get some leaf growth, like this guy. The roots have attached itself to the sphagnum, so I don't want to pull the sphagnum off. I have fuzzy little roots coming off of this guy. Over a period of time, once I start to see more root growth, I'll eventually transfer this into soil. But this helps to retain moisture, keeps it nice and humid. The clear box allows it to get light. My husband drilled in some holes on the top for me so it gets some ventilation so it doesn't get moldy. And I have a little box full of goodies that I can put in a bright and warm spot. Leave it alone, check on the water every so often, making sure I have some condensation so I know there's humidity in here, and eventually I'll have roots. And the third method that you can do to propagate your plants is through soil. And that would be to place your plant cuttings or leaves directly into soil. And the theory is that it grows roots and will grow into a new plant. This tends to take a little longer than the other two methods, but is still very effective for most plants. I have a spider plant, little baby, that I had taken from the mother plant and put into soil, and it grew its own roots and has grown into its own plant and is now having new growth. This has taken me maybe like 4 or 5 weeks for it to substantiate itself, but I have a little plant that is already planted in soil and is happy and healthy and will just continue to get bigger for me. And then you could always do the soil route, which tends to be very effective for succulents, and I think is the preferred method for succulents. My preferred method. Maybe not for everybody, but it is my preferred method. These are just little leaves that have come off of my sedum burrito, my little donkey tail plant. Since these leaves fall off so easily, it's a very fragile plant, you can take the leaves and place them directly onto soil. I tend to kind of push it in just a little bit so it doesn't move, and you will notice that they will grow roots and new plants. Now, the soil method, in my experience, has been the slowest method, but is also probably one of the easiest. Well, maybe the water is easiest. I don't know. I'll let you be the judge. But they're all 3 very effective ways of propagating your plants that you get very quick results and have been highly effective. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind with a lot of plants, there is a high risk of rot, and that can be very dependent on the actual mother plant, the species, whether it be tissue culture or not. It's a lot to worry about that you really don't need to worry about. I would honestly just experiment by taking leaves or stem cuttings and trying the different methods and see what you get. That's really the whole fun of propagating. I'm going to now show you the best way to take clippings from your plant using a Scindapsus pictus. I have a silverian here that has a very long vine that I want to clip back because I want to keep my plant more full and less leggy. So I'm going to go through that with you right now. Alright, so just some very basic plant anatomy. The main thing you really want to be able to identify is the node. Now the node, I like to call it the joint. It is where the leaf typically will grow or extend from the stem. So most nodes are identifiable, especially on aroids, by a little nub, or you'll find kind of a thicker part where you feel like a little bump, or a leaf may grow out of it, but these are the nodes. Now these are important to know because this is typically where new growth and or roots can grow from. So this is where you want to identify where your new growth is going to come from. So I have two nodes that are somewhat close together up here. I have another node here that does not have a leaf growing from it. And then I have another node here with a small leaf. I'm actually going to cut down here. So the small areas between your nodes are known as internodes, and that's where you want to make your cuts. You do want to use clean and sterile clippers because you don't want to transfer any bacteria or fungus or any kind of foreign substance to your plant since you are exposing it just like you would a wound. So cut in between in the internodes and you snip. Now because each node potentially could become a new growth point, one stem or one clipping could potentially be more. So on here, I'm actually going to cut where I have a leaf for each cutting. So right here, I'm going to cut between these two nodes, which give me a cutting here, cut between these two nodes, which will give me a cutting here. I'm actually going to cut off this part because I don't have a leaf. You can propagate this on its own and it could still grow, but because I have a very healthy plant and I will probably get more cuttings in the future, I'm not willing to wait for that. Now, in most cases, when you have the end cutting, you will often have new growth coming out. Now, because all the energy is going to be spent on growing roots, it is not going to spend any energy on the new growth. You can leave the new growth there. More than likely it's going to fall off or shrivel up or just never grow. Or you could cut it off because you want all of the energy to go to roots. That's up to you. I think it's kind of fun to experiment and find out. But I'm going to cut off the excess stem because that is a really long stem there. And wherever I do have very long stem, I'm going to cut because I don't need all that extra. Now I do recommend that you leave your cuttings to dry out for a period of time. Depending on the plant, it can be anywhere from 30 minutes to hours. So I'll probably leave these out for maybe an hour or two just to ensure that the ends have calloused over. I've heard that some people use cinnamon. They'll dip the ends in cinnamon because it is a natural antifungal, antibacterial spice that can help keep them from getting a disease. But you treat them very much like you would a cut or an open wound because that's what it is for this poor little guy. So you want to let them heal or callus over and dry, to where there's no sap excreting from the ends. And then you can propagate by means that you choose, whether you like to water propagate, use sphagnum, or put directly into soil. Just for now, they're going in water. But all in all, propagation should really be fun. If you want to have a more full-looking plant, typically propagation is the best way to do it. So you can take cuttings from the longer vines, propagate them, get them to grow roots, and put them back into the mother plant. That will help give you some extra foliage. Take cuttings to share with your friends, to do trades. If you just like the look of propagation vessels, which I know a lot of people do. I mean, they're so pretty. But it's fun to watch it grow. That's it, I think. I'm sure we will address more complicated propagating methods or more advanced techniques or more advanced information later on in another video, but that's the basics. So if you're a brand new beginner just learning how to propagate, this will get you started, and then you can learn propagating more advanced in the future. But I appreciate you guys watching. Thanks so much. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments or share your experience with certain plants because every plant is different and we all like to share information. I feel like I want to say more stuff, but I guess that's it. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.